Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we drift into the world of medieval knights, a world shaped by courage, ritual, devotion, and mysteries that still echo through time. Imagine distant battlefields lit by torches, armor gleaming beneath starlight, and oaths whispered with a seriousness that could reshape a life. These figures were far more complex than the tales that survived them. They lived in an age where every decision could alter kingdoms, and where reputation traveled farther than horses ever could. Their world shimmered with symbolism and hidden meaning, with codes of honor that demanded discipline in both thought and action. As you settle in, allow the stories of these ancient warriors to become a gentle tapestry, woven with quiet wonder. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, just breathe. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let this passage into the past cradle your thoughts. Let's begin. Knights trained for battle from as early as childhood. In the medieval world, the path to knighthood began at an age that would feel impossibly early by modern standards. Children who were still learning to form clear thoughts about the world were already being shaped for lives of discipline and danger. Their daily routines were structured around physical strength, emotional restraint, and the gradual cultivation of courage. They were asked to master riding skills before most children today learn to ride a bicycle and to understand the rhythms of animals, weather, and terrain long before they understood the workings of society. These early years were meant to form instinct rather than knowledge. A young trainee was taught to respond to unexpected movement, shifting ground, or sudden fear with clarity rather than panic. Even seemingly playful activities were designed to heighten balance, coordination, and awareness. These children grew up with responsibilities that surpassed anything expected of their peers, and through repetition and ritual they came to see bravery not as a moment of heroism, but as a lifelong skill. Their minds were shaped around the idea that danger was never far away, and that preparation was a kind of armor long before metal ever touched their skin. A knight's first teacher was often the unforgiving landscape itself. Before instructors or formal training halls shaped their abilities, young trainees learned lessons written directly into the earth. Hills, forests, rivers, and open fields became classrooms with no walls, giving them challenges that shifted with the seasons. They learned how to read soil for stability, how to judge the firmness of grass after rainfall, and how the wind might hide or reveal sound at great distances. The natural world offered constant tests. A slippery slope could teach caution, a fallen log could train balance, and a shallow stream could reveal how quickly water changes strength when rainfall gathers upstream. These experiences created warriors who understood terrain as intimately as they knew their own breath. They learned to move silently across leaves, to predict how mud would cling to boots and hooves, and to sense when the air hinted at approaching storms. This bond with the land shaped not only their tactical instincts, but their worldview. A knight who learned from the landscape learned humility, patience, and adaptability. Long before they held weapons or armor, they mastered the art of cooperating with forces far larger and older than themselves. Some knights mastered horsemanship techniques that seem almost superhuman today. Horsemanship for medieval knights went far beyond simple riding. It required an almost seamless fusion of movement and intention between human and animal. Knights trained until they could redirect a charging horse with the slightest shift of muscle or a nearly invisible change in weight. They learned to ride in dense forests, on narrow cliffside paths, and through crowded formations of soldiers without losing control. Many could guide their horses using only their knees, allowing both hands to wield weapons or shields with complete freedom. Horses were trained to respond to breathe patterns and subtle pressure, and a well-practiced pair could communicate more fluidly than many modern athletes. Some knights could vault onto a moving horse or lean so far to one side that they could retrieve an object from the ground without breaking pace. These feats were not theatrical displays, but essential battlefield survival skills. In moments of danger, a knight's bond with his horse could determine the fate of entire companies. This deep partnership created an impression that horse and rider functioned as one being, a phenomenon that astonished even medieval observers. Medieval war horses were bred to think and react like trained warriors. War horses were not ordinary animals forced into extraordinary tasks. They were purposefully bred and raised to understand conflict in a way that few other animals could. From a young age, they were exposed to the sounds of clashing metal and shouting voices, so they would not panic under the pressure of actual battle. Their training taught them to push forward against shields, to hold steady when chaos erupted around them, and to maneuver through formations with remarkable precision. These horses were taught to kick, shoulder, and trample when necessary, acting as powerful extensions of the knight's intention. They learned to anticipate danger, responding instinctively to shifts in tension or movement. Their loyalty to their rider was cultivated through constant care, voice familiarity, and trust built over years of shared work. A fully trained warhorse did not merely carry a knight. It made tactical decisions of its own, choosing paths, avoiding hazards, and reacting faster than a human could. Their intelligence and fierce discipline were so extraordinary that some chronicles described them as warriors in their own right. Real knightly armor was far more flexible and agile than most people imagine. Popular images often portray armor as heavy, rigid, and impossible to move in, yet historical evidence reveals something astonishingly different. Well-crafted plate armor was articulated like an engineered exoskeleton, allowing joints to bend smoothly and precisely. A fully suited knight could crouch, roll, twist, and even mount a horse without assistance. The metal plates were shaped to distribute weight evenly across the body, making the suit feel far lighter than expected. Padding underneath served as shock absorption and prevented the metal from restricting movement. Many armors were so finely balanced that the wearer could run with surprising speed or pivot sharply in combat. Artisans designed the suit to function as both protection and enhancement, guiding posture and reinforcing movement. Knights trained until the armor felt natural, almost like a second skin. When worn correctly, it allowed the body to move in harmony with its structure, turning physical limitations into strengths. This agility astonished observers who had only imagined armor as a burden. To the light, it was a carefully engineered partner in survival. Knights could run, jump, and dance while wearing full plate. The belief that armor made movement slow and clumsy comes largely from theatrical replicas rather than authentic historical craftsmanship. Real plate armor was engineered with an intricate network of joints that allowed for astonishing mobility. Knights practiced repeatedly until they could leap over obstacles, climb ladders, or vault onto platforms while fully suited. Their training often included footwork drills resembling dance, designed to teach rapid changes in direction and coordinated balance. These exercises improved spatial awareness and strengthened the subtle muscles needed to control movement within the armor. Dancers who have tested historically accurate replicas often remark on how surprisingly fluid the suits feel. Knights themselves demonstrated these abilities during festivals and ceremonies, performing athletic displays that amazed crowds. Agility was essential for survival on the battlefield, since an immobile warrior was a vulnerable one. The fact that knights could sprint toward danger or evade blows with such grace is a testament to both the craftsmanship of armorers and the dedication of the warriors who trained in it. The ritual of knighthood was designed to transform identity as much as skill. The ceremony that marked a person's transition into knighthood was not simply a formal acknowledgement of training. It was a symbolic rebirth meant to reshape the individual's understanding of duty, purpose, and belonging. Rituals varied across regions, but many included periods of silent reflection, cleansing with water, and nights spent in prayer or meditation. These acts were intended to separate the initiate from ordinary life and prepare them for a path defined by responsibility. The ceremony often included symbolic touches, such as a gentle blow meant to remind the new knight that honor must be protected even when painful. Witnesses understood that the ritual marked not just skill achieved, but character transformed. It was the moment when a person became a guardian of values, a representative of ideals that extended far beyond personal ambition. In the minds of many medieval communities, this transformation was as real as any legal change. It shaped how knights saw themselves and how others depended on them. Some knights took vows that bound them more firmly than royal law. In a world where political alliances shifted constantly, personal vows held extraordinary power. Knights often swore promises that reached deeper than written agreements or royal commands. These vows could involve lifelong loyalty to a lord, protection of a vulnerable community, or dedication to a spiritual path. Breaking such a vow was seen not only as dishonorable, but as a fracture of identity itself. Some vows were made after intense periods of reflection, while others were forged in moments of crisis when the stakes were immense. These promises shaped behavior long after the events that inspired them. A vow might prevent a knight from accepting wealth, from harming a specific adversary, or from retreating in battle. The psychological weight of these commitments often surpassed political obligations. Many knights believed that the stability of their own soul rested upon the integrity of their word. As a result, vows became invisible chains that shaped decisions, alliances, and even the course of wars. Chivalry was less a code and more a lifelong psychological discipline. Although often described as a set of rules, chivalry functioned more like a continuous mental practice. It required knights to balance ferocity with compassion, power with restraint, and ambition with humility. This balance was difficult to maintain, which meant chivalry demanded daily effort rather than simple adherence to a list. Knights were encouraged to examine their motives, to recognize when pride clouded judgment, and to ensure that strength never overshadowed fairness. Chivalry shaped how they approached interactions with allies, adversaries, and civilians alike. It was expected to influence how a knight viewed conflict, justice, and personal honor. Some orders even required knights to engage in reflective practices designed to strengthen self-awareness. Far from being an ornamental ideal, chivalry aimed to regulate the emotional life of the warrior. It transformed combat into a moral trial and victory into something judged not only by outcome, but by conduct. This internal discipline often proved more demanding than the rigors of physical training. Knightly oaths were crafted to reshape a warrior's view of honor and fear. The oaths sworn by knights were meticulously constructed to influence how they experienced courage, responsibility, and personal risk. These declarations required knights to redefine fear, not as a force to avoid, but as a signal for vigilance and focus. By promising to defend the vulnerable, uphold justice, or protect a cause greater than themselves, knights reframed danger as purposeful rather than chaotic. Oaths encouraged warriors to think of honor as something external, but had to be safeguarded, creating a sense of duty that transcended personal survival. Many oaths invoked spiritual or symbolic elements that heightened their emotional weight. Once spoken, the words served as anchors during moments of crisis, guiding decisions when instinct might have faltered. Knights learned to rely on these commitments to steady their thoughts under pressure. Over time, the oath became a psychological tool that shaped their sense of identity, turning fear into a companion that reminded them of the importance of their mission. Many knights carried heraldic symbols that contained hidden messages. Heraldry served as far more than colourful decoration. For many knights, it functioned as a private language, layered with meaning that only certain observers could fully interpret. A single shape or colour arrangement might signal loyalty to a particular lineage, while an added pattern hinted at a history of victory or sacrifice. Some symbols referenced old family stories that were never written down but passed between generations through carefully maintained shields and banners. Knights used these designs to declare identity on the battlefield, where spoken words were lost beneath the roar of combat. Certain markings indicated alliances that were politically sensitive and could not be openly discussed at court. Others honored ancestors or mentors whose guidance shaped the knight's life. Even small variations carried weight. A slight change of hue or a newly added animal motif might broadcast ambition or warn rivals of shifting intentions. Observers trained in heraldry could read these symbols as fluently as text, recognizing family ties, personal achievements, or subtle messages of challenge or reconciliation. In this way, heraldry became a living tapestry of memory and meaning, woven into every knightly appearance. Armour decoration was a language of its own. Beyond serving as a protective shell, a knight's armour often functioned as a canvas filled with symbols, engravings, and artistic touches that conveyed social and personal significance. Artisans spent countless hours etching winding patterns, religious motifs, and intricate imagery that revealed pieces of a knight's story without a single spoken word. Decoration reflected values or aspirations that the wearer wanted others to see. Some knights displayed images of saints to signal devotion, while others featured mythical animals intended to project strength or resilience. Patterns carved into metal could represent past journeys or battles survived. Wealthier knights commissioned highly polished finishes that gleamed like mirrors, so they could appear almost otherworldly in torchlight. A knight who wished to intimidate rivals might request darker treatment or aggressive imagery that suggested ferocity. Decorative choices told allies and adversaries alike what the knight considered important. Armour embellishment also paid homage to the craftsmanship of the smiths, whose skill shaped these masterpieces. Each engraved line or chased border reminded viewers that armour was never simply metal. It was identity rendered in steel. Some knights designed secret emblems recognizable only to trusted allies. Knights who operated in politically tense regions sometimes relied on coded imagery to communicate loyalty or intent without alerting rivals. These hidden emblems were often disguised as ordinary decoration but contained subtle details that carried meaning for those who knew where to look. A small alteration in the curve of a symbol could signal support for a particular cause. A tiny animal or plant shape might indicate safe passage or warn of nearby danger. Trusted allies learned to interpret these variations much like a private cipher. During negotiations or gatherings filled with competing factions, a subtle emblem might reassure a friend that support remained strong, even when public alliances appeared uncertain. Some emblems were worn on inner garments rather than outer armor, revealed only during secret meetings. Others appeared on rings or belt fittings where their size made them nearly invisible to outsiders. These concealed designs allowed knights to navigate complex political landscapes with a measure of quiet security. They served as a reminder that in medieval society, communication was not always spoken or written. Sometimes it was hidden in plain sight. A knight's sword was often treated as a living companion. To many knights, the sword they carried represented far more than a tool of war. It embodied duty, heritage, and the weight of personal responsibility. The forging process itself was viewed as sacred. The metal passed through cycles of heating and shaping that symbolized endurance through trial. When a knight received a sword, He often performed rituals of dedication that acknowledged it as a partner in future struggles. Knights were known to name their swords not as ornamentation, but as recognition that this piece of steel would accompany them into every danger. Swords were maintained with extraordinary care. Polishers and sharpeners treated the blade as a valuable heirloom, preserving its balance and edge for generations. A sword also carried emotional meaning. It reminded a knight of those who had taught him, the vows he swore, and the burdens he accepted. Many knights requested that their sword be returned to their family or placed in a sacred setting after death. The bond was so strong that some chroniclers described knights speaking to their blades in moments of crisis, seeking focus or reassurance in the presence of their most constant companion. Blade making was so complex that some techniques vanished for centuries. The creation of a medieval sword demanded skills that blended art, science, and intuition. Smiths worked with fire, air, and metal in a dance of timing and precision that could take decades to master. They studied how different ores behaved under heat, how repeated folding refined impurities, and how varying the carbon content shaped the blade's character. Certain regional styles produced blades admired across continents. Some were known for flexibility, others for durability, or the shimmering patterns produced by layered construction. Yet not all of these methods survived. As wars shifted and political centers changed, some smithing traditions faded. Secrets passed from master to apprentice were lost when workshops dissolved or when knowledge remained unrecorded. Modern metallurgy has attempted to recreate these ancient techniques, yet some results still elude complete understanding. A few surviving blades display qualities that seem almost magical. Their edges retain sharpness despite centuries of wear, and their patterns reflect craftsmanship of astonishing refinement. These mysteries remind historians that medieval technology possessed depths that even modern tools struggle to uncover. Knights sometimes fought with weapons designed for a single legendary duel. While most weapons were crafted for repeated use, certain knights commissioned blades or specialized arms intended for one monumental confrontation. These weapons reflected the symbolism and personal significance of the duel itself. Some were shaped to counter the exact style of a known opponent, incorporating weight distribution or grip design that matched expected movements. Others bore markings that commemorated an oath or feud that had shaped the knight's life. Preparation for such duels involved careful practice with the unique weapon so that its unfamiliar balance became instinctive. In some traditions, the weapon was retired after the duel regardless of victory or defeat. It might be hung in a hall as testimony to a resolved conflict, or offered to a place of worship as a gesture of humility. In rare cases, dual weapons were intentionally designed with unusual features that highlighted honor over brutality, reinforcing that the duel served as a ritual expression of justice rather than a simple contest of crest. Strength. These rare weapons stand as reminders that medieval combat could be as symbolic as it was dangerous. The sharpest knightly swords were not used to cut at all. Contrary to popular imagination, the sharpest edges found on some medieval swords served specific purposes that did not involve conventional slicing. On heavily armored opponents, cutting had limited effect, so knights relied on the sword's point and structural rigidity rather than its edge. Blades were engineered for thrusting into the gaps of armor where mobility required narrower openings. The precision and strength of these points made them invaluable in close combat. Knights practiced techniques that involved gripping the blade with both hands along the fat, so they could guide the point with exact control. This method allowed them to use the sword almost like a spear or lever. The sharp edge, though impressive, played little role in defeating an armored foe. Instead, the sword became a multifunctional instrument that blended agility, geometry, and leverage. Understanding this reveals that medieval swords were not intended to slice dramatically through armor, but were refined tools adapted to the realities of the battlefield. Their design reflected strategic understanding rather than theatrical flair. Many knights preferred blunt force weapons for astonishingly strategic reasons. Blunt weapons such as maces and warhammers offered advantages that cutting weapons could not achieve against armored opponents. A solid strike from such a weapon could deform metal, transfer immense shock through protective layers, and incapacitate an adversary even without breaking the surface. Knights trained to generate force through controlled rotational movement, allowing these compact weapons to hit with surprising power. Blunt arms required less room to maneuver than long blades, which made them effective in crowded melees. They also demanded less maintenance since edges did not require constant sharpening. Some knights favored these weapons for symbolic reasons as well. In certain regions, blunt weapons were associated with authority or justice, reflecting the idea that the knight's role was to subdue rather than destroy. Their effectiveness also signaled evolving military thinking. As armor improved, impact became more decisive than cutting ability. These strategic considerations demonstrate that knights selected their weapons with careful insight rather than simple preference. Certain knights became famous for fighting entirely without shields. Although shields were valuable defensive tools, some knights achieved renown by discarding them in favor of a more agile fighting style. Fighting without a shield freed the offhand to manipulate the blade or control the opponent directly. It also allowed the knight to remain lighter and move with greater fluidity. These individuals trained extensively to read the timing of incoming strikes and to use precise footwork to avoid or redirect attacks that others would block. Some developed signature techniques that exploited the extra reach or leverage gained by using both hands on the weapon. Choosing to fight without a shield could send a message on the battlefield as well. It suggested confidence, skill, and willingness to rely on mobility rather than defense. Though risky, this approach showcased remarkable mastery. The fame of such knights spread quickly because their feats challenged expectations and demonstrated that victory could be achieved through methods outside traditional norms. Knights adapted their fighting style to each opponent in mere heartbeats. Combat training emphasized rapid assessment of an adversary's stance, rhythm, and intentions. Knights learned to study how an opponent held a weapon, where weight was centered, and how breath patterns revealed readiness. Within moments, they could identify weaknesses or predict likely attacks. This ability required immense focus and experience. Knights trained through countless sparring sessions that exposed them to a wide variety of fighting styles. They learned how to shift tactics instantly, moving from aggressive strikes to defensive redirection or feints that opened opportunities. This adaptability made them unpredictable and dangerous. Skilled knights could turn an opponent's strength into a disadvantage by disrupting timing or exploiting hesitation. Their minds became as quick as their bodies. They evaluated threats, adjusted movement, and recalibrated distance with astonishing speed. This dynamic approach elevated combat from physical struggle to a form of intricate problem-solving. It demonstrated that true mastery involved not only power, but the flexibility to change course in the blink of an eye. Some knights trained by sparring blindfolded to heighten awareness. Blindfold training pushed knights far beyond ordinary physical skill, forcing them to rely on senses that most people rarely notice. Without sight, every sound became a clue, and every shift of air offered information about an opponent's position or movement. Knights learned to detect the scrape of a boot against soil, the slight whistle of a weapon cutting through space, or the faint adjustment of breathing that signaled an impending strike. This practice strengthened intuition and reflexes, allowing them to respond instantly in moments when vision was blocked by helmets, dust, or the confusion of battle. Blindfold drills also cultivated calm under pressure, Knights learned not to panic when darkness limited their awareness, but to trust their training and remain centered. Over time, this heightened perception became a powerful tool. A knight who mastered blindfold sparring moved with uncanny precision, able to anticipate danger from directions that seemed impossible. The training demonstrated that awareness did not belong solely to the eyes. It resided in the entire body. Other knights practiced combat while balancing on narrow beams. To achieve stability in unpredictable environments, some knights trained on narrow platforms where any misstep could mean falling. These elevated or constricted surfaces forced them to refine balance, footwork, and focus in ways ordinary ground could never replicate. Combat on a beam demanded constant micro-adjustments as the body responded to shifting weight or the force of incoming blows. Trainees learned to maintain posture while striking, blocking, or pivoting with limited space. This practice mirrored real battlefield challenges where uneven terrain, rubble, or crowded formations restricted movement. Knights who mastered beam training became exceptional at maintaining equilibrium, even when chaos erupted around them. The discipline required intense concentration, since hesitation or distraction could lead to immediate loss of footing. As knights improved, instructors introduced additional challenges, such as multiple opponents or sudden changes in position. By the end of their training, these warriors could fight with remarkable control on any terrain. Their stability became an invisible foundation of their skill. Medieval combat schools developed systems of movement that look strangely modern. Although separated from contemporary martial arts by centuries, medieval combat systems displayed a surprising sophistication that resembles techniques practiced today. Manuals created by master instructors outlined strategies for timing, leverage, angles of attack, and efficient use of energy. Movements followed principles of biomechanics similar to those taught in modern athletics and self-defense. Instructors emphasized fluid transitions, controlled footwork, and coordinated actions that allowed knights to conserve strength during extended engagements. Training included drills for grappling, joint manipulation, weapon retention, and disarming techniques. Some schools organized their teachings into structured sequences that students rehearsed repeatedly until they became instinctive. These carefully preserved manuscripts provide a glimpse into the intellectual depth behind knightly training. Far from chaotic brawling, medieval combat was a disciplined art informed by observation and experimentation. The resemblance to modern systems reveals that human understanding of movement and efficiency has deep historical roots. Knightly training included psychological conditioning we would recognize today. Beyond physical mastery, knights developed mental resilience through exercises that anticipated the emotional strain of warfare. They practiced regulating breath to remain calm in frightening situations and used visualization to prepare for intense confrontations. Instructors created controlled stress scenarios where trainees faced unexpected challenges to strengthen adaptability. Knights learned to separate immediate instinct from deliberate choice, cultivating a steady mindset that could endure fear and confusion. Some training incorporated rituals that reinforced purpose and identity, helping knights anchor themselves in moments when uncertainty threatened clarity. The goal was to create warriors who remained composed even when danger appeared overwhelming. This psychological conditioning resembles methods used by modern athletes, emergency responders, and soldiers. It demonstrates that medieval instructors understood the mind as a crucial component of battle readiness. Their techniques aimed to produce calm judgment, emotional endurance, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Some knights were so skilled that their opponents surrendered on sight. Historical accounts describe rare individuals whose reputation for mastery was so widely known that enemies hesitated before drawing their weapons. These knights cultivated an aura through displays of precision, control, and tactical insight. Their victories in tournaments or past battles spread through song, story, and rumor, shaping expectations long before they arrived on a field. When such a knight entered combat, opponents sometimes re-evaluated their chances, recognizing that defeat felt inevitable. This psychological effect could end conflicts quickly. The knight's presence alone altered morale on both sides. Allies felt emboldened while foes experienced a sense of resignation. In medieval warfare, perception held immense power. A warrior who embodied legendary skill could win not only through strength, but through influence over the minds of adversaries. These moments revealed how fear, admiration, and expectation shaped outcomes as profoundly as steel. The most feared knights often won battles before weapons were drawn. Some knights cultivated strategic reputations that changed the emotional atmosphere of a battlefield long before combat began. Their leadership, bold decisions, and history of unexpected maneuvers created an air of inevitability around them. Rivals feared being outmatched not only physically but intellectually. Such knights used calculated displays of confidence, disciplined formations, or sudden repositioning to unsettle opposing forces. Troops who faced them sometimes hesitated or broke formation, sensing defeat before any strike occurred. The psychological advantage gained through this intimidation was immense. It demonstrated that warfare depended not only on physical confrontation, but on mastery of morale. A knight who understood this could steer the entire battle through posture, timing, and presence alone. Their power rested in perception, shaping outcomes before blades even lifted. Knights used advanced battlefield tactics long before they were written down. Many of the strategies later recorded in military treatises had already been practiced by knights who learned through experience rather than formal documentation. Coordinated movements, feigned retreats, defensive rotations, and controlled advances were used intuitively by leaders who understood the flow of battle. These tactics required rapid communication and trust among warriors. Knights trained to observe formations, identify weaknesses, and exploit shifting opportunities. Their knowledge grew from countless engagements where survival depended on innovation rather than tradition. Only later did scholars and commanders record these methods, giving structure to what knights had long practiced. This reveals that medieval warfare was far more organized and thoughtful than often assumed. Knights did not simply charge forward. They studied patterns, adjusted strategies, and developed insights that influenced later generations of military thinkers. Certain knightly formations could break entire armies. Specific formations developed by knightly leaders created overwhelming force when executed with precision. One formation concentrated heavily armored riders into a narrow wedge designed to pierce enemy lines with focused momentum. Another relied on alternating ranks of shielded and unshielded combatants who advanced in rhythmic waves. These formations required perfect timing, deep trust, and disciplined teamwork. When successful, they disrupted enemy cohesion, creating confusion that spread rapidly across the field. Infantry units facing such formations often broke apart before sustained contact occurred. Combined with the speed and weight of horses, these strategies produced effects that felt unstoppable to those caught in their path. The success of these formations depended on unity as much as strength. Knights learned that coordinated purpose could overwhelm even numerically superior forces. Knights often served as the communication network in the chaos of war. Before reliable signaling tools existed, knights acted as mobile messengers who carried instructions across rapidly shifting battlefields. Their speed, awareness, and commanding presence allowed them to navigate through danger while maintaining clarity of thought. They memorized complex sequences of orders and delivered them without error, even under extreme pressure. A single knight might ride from one flank to another, interpreting changes, relaying urgent information, and adjusting tactics on behalf of commanders. Their ability to read the battlefield allowed them to prioritize messages and adapt instructions when conditions changed. This role required courage and precision. A mistake could misdirect hundreds of soldiers. Through their efforts, armies functioned as coordinated units rather than scattered groups. Their communication work demonstrated that knights were not only fighters. They were vital links connecting strategy with action. A single knight could change the course of a battle through tactical insight. Historical chronicles describe moments when one knight recognized a developing opportunity and acted decisively before others even saw the shift. This might involve exploiting a weak flank, intercepting a critical messenger, or redirecting troops at a pivotal moment. Such decisions required extraordinary situational awareness and the confidence to assume responsibility without waiting for command approval. These knights combined experience with intuition. They studied enemy patterns, anticipated reactions, and assessed risks in moments that left others frozen. When they chose correctly, their actions turned the tide of battles that seemed lost. Their influence extended beyond physical strength. They demonstrated that sharp perception and swift judgment could be as powerful as any weapon. These rare individuals became remembered not only for bravery, but for their extraordinary ability to see decisive possibilities where others saw confusion. Some knights became living legends within their own lifetimes. There were knights whose reputations grew at such astonishing speed that they became legends long before any chronicler set their names into parchment. Word of their feats traveled across borders carried by merchants, pilgrims, and wandering singers who repeated stories with growing wonder. People gathered in marketplaces to hear news of these figures whose presence seemed to bend the world around them. Their courage in battle and their composure under pressure created an aura that felt larger than a single individual. When such a knight arrived in a distant region, crowds often assembled simply to witness the quiet gravity of someone whose actions had shaped the fate of entire communities. These knights gained influence through personality as much as skill. Their confidence inspired armies, and their insight earned the trust of rulers who valued both strength and clarity of judgment. Over time, tales about their deeds merged with symbolism, transforming them into icons whose impact extended into art, law, and cultural expectation. Though their lives eventually ended like all others, the stories surrounding them continued to grow until it became impossible to separate absolute truth from the admiration that helped create their legend. Others fought entirely in secret, leaving no name behind. Not every knight sought recognition. Some devoted their lives to missions that demanded complete anonymity. They moved quietly between borders, guided by secret agreements or urgent requests from leaders who needed discreet intervention. These knights protected envoys, escorted vulnerable travelers, gathered intelligence, or resolved emerging threats before they had the chance to erupt into open chaos. Their armor bore no identifying colors, and their movements were carefully timed so that witnesses could not trace their involvement. They accepted that their work would never appear in chronicles or songs, since acknowledgement would undermine everything they were tasked to achieve. Many served in remote regions where danger came from unexpected directions, and they made decisions with no expectation of reward beyond the knowledge that conflict had been prevented. Their courage manifested not in public celebration, but in private endurance. They carried the weight of responsibility in silence, knowing that those they protected might never learn their names. The existence of such knights demonstrates that medieval heroism sometimes unfolded in complete darkness, shaped by individuals who valued purpose far more than fame. Knights sometimes operated as diplomats during moments of extreme tension. Although often associated with combat, knights frequently stepped into the delicate role of diplomat when rival kingdoms approached the edge of conflict. Their status gave their words credibility, and their oath-bound reputation assured both sides that they spoke with honesty. Knights travelled between courts carrying proposals, clarifying misunderstandings, and interpreting every nuance of expression or pause. They understood that a single misphrased sentence could collapse negotiations and plunge entire regions into violence. In these moments, combat training offered unexpected help, for knights were accustomed to making swift judgments under pressure. They maintained calm when voices rose, gently redirected arguments, and emphasized shared interests that could support peace. Many diplomatic missions required bravery equal to battlefield risks, since a hostile court might react unpredictably. Yet successful negotiations spared thousands from danger. These knights left deep, if unrecorded, marks on history by preventing wars before they began. Their diplomatic work proved that strength in medieval society involved much more than the ability to fight. It required empathy, patience, and a sharp understanding of human nature. A knight's armour could send political messages without a single word. Armour was not merely protective. It communicated identity, loyalty, and ambition with remarkable subtlety. A knight might select colours associated with a powerful family to express alliance, or display patterns inherited from ancestors to remind observers of a long-established lineage. Minor variations in decoration hinted at personal intentions, such as a desire to enter a new courtly circle or reaffirm a bond with a distant region. Even the finish of the metal carried meaning. A brilliant sheen suggested honor and discipline, while visible wear demonstrated long service in the field. During ceremonies, well-informed courtiers studied armor carefully, noting any symbol that might indicate a shift in allegiance or a newly forming political relationship. The armor functioned like a silent herald, delivering messages that would have been unsafe to speak aloud. This visual language allowed knights to navigate complex social environments with precision. Their choices shaped expectations long before they uttered a single sentence, proving that communication in medieval life often relied on artistry rather than speech. Some knights were masters of multiple languages. Knights who could speak several languages held enormous value in a world of shifting borders and fragile alliances. Their ability to converse directly with foreign envoys reduced the risk of misinterpretation and helped foster trust where tension threatened stability. Many learned languages through exposure during campaigns, listening to allies and adversaries until unfamiliar sounds became meaningful patterns. Others studied under scholars who introduced them to grammar, rhetoric, and written texts from distant cultures. These knights translated manuscripts, interpreted negotiations, and guided rulers through discussions where clarity was essential. Their skills extended beyond words. Language study opened windows into unfamiliar customs, beliefs, and worldviews, giving these knights broader perspectives on the societies they encountered. This knowledge allowed them to move gracefully across cultural boundaries, resolving disputes or securing agreements that might have collapsed without their insight. Their linguistic mastery demonstrated that intellectual curiosity could shape history as profoundly as strategic power. Knights were often trained to read subtle cultural signals at court. Courtly life demanded an acute awareness of gestures, tone, and layered etiquette. Knights learned to read these complex signals so they could navigate political landscapes as effectively as battlefields. A slight tilt of the head, a carefully chosen word, or a brief silence often conveyed more meaning than a direct statement. Knights were taught to interpret these cues, noticing when alliances shifted, when tensions quietly escalated, or when a rival concealed frustration behind polite speech. This sensitivity allowed them to protect their lords by anticipating dangers that had not yet been acknowledged. Knowledge of cultural signals also allowed them to avoid giving offense, since a single misstep in protocol could disrupt delicate negotiations. Through observation and practice, knights developed an instinctive reading of human behavior that complemented their martial skills. This training highlighted that power at court required patience, perceptiveness, and constant attention to the unspoken languages that governed noble interaction. Many knights were skilled poets in an age when poetry was considered power. Poetry in medieval society held a level of influence that is difficult to imagine today. It shaped reputations, elevated political messages, and conveyed ideas with emotional force. Many knights embraced this art form, composing verses that explored devotion, loyalty, longing, or philosophical reflection. These works circulated across courts, influencing how listeners perceived the poet's character. A knight who demonstrated mastery of language displayed sensitivity, thoughtfulness, and cultural refinement. Poetry also served strategic purposes. Knights used it to honor patrons, strengthen alliances, or subtly diffuse tensions by expressing sentiments that could not be said directly. Their poems revealed an inner life that contrasted sharply with the public expectation of stoic strength. This combination of artistic expression and martial identity fascinated contemporaries, reinforcing the belief that a true knight pursued excellence in both thought and action. The tradition reflects a world where words shaped power as significantly as weapons. Some knights composed songs that became political weapons. Music traveled farther and faster than formal messages. Knights who learned to compose songs understood that melodies lodged themselves in memory, carrying influence into villages, courts, and distant territories. A song praising a ruler strengthened loyalty, while a composition celebrating unity could support a fragile alliance. Some songs offered commentary on corruption or injustice through metaphor, allowing knights to express bold ideas without directly confronting authority. Performers repeated these songs widely, spreading ideas long after the original composer moved on. In some regions, a single melody shaped public sentiment during times of unrest, guiding communities to support or oppose specific actions. Knights recognized this power and used it carefully. Their songs demonstrated that political persuasion in medieval life often emerged through artful storytelling rather than overt declaration. Through music, they harnessed emotion as a powerful instrument of influence. Knightly love poetry could influence alliances and rivalries. Love poetry written by knights carried more than romantic emotion. It could affirm loyalty, honor noble families, or reveal the subtle shifting of political aspiration. When performed at court, a poem praising a particular figure often indicated alliance or admiration that observers interpreted with great care. These poems strengthened relationships by publicly acknowledging respect or affection. Some expressed longing in symbolic terms that hinted at unresolved tensions within rival factions. Court audiences dissected every line, searching for clues about intentions concealed within metaphors. A cleverly crafted poem could soften hostility or stir competitive pride among nobles who understood the social weight of artistic expression. For knights, poetry became a means of communicating emotional truth and strategic positioning simultaneously. Their verses influenced how others perceived them, shaping interactions and alliances. This blend of art and diplomacy shows that medieval politics often unfolded through subtle forms of expression rather than blunt directives. Knights used storytelling to strengthen their reputation and authority. Storytelling allowed knights to shape how their peers and followers understood their experiences. Through careful narration, they highlighted moments that demonstrated courage, wisdom, or moral conviction. These stories traveled from gathering to gathering, building a shared sense of identity among those who heard them. Knights used stories to teach younger trainees, illustrating lessons about honor or perseverance. They also used them to reassure allies, explaining how past challenges had been overcome through discipline and resolve. A well-told story created emotional resonance, connecting listeners to the knight's values. Over time, these narratives influenced how communities perceived both individuals and the broader ideals of knighthood. Storytelling became a form of quiet leadership. It reinforced authority without the need for force, proving that influence in medieval life often grew from the power of well-chosen words. Many knightly legends began as propaganda. Stories about knights often grew from motives far more strategic than simple admiration. Courts recognized that a dramatic tale could inspire loyalty, intimidate rivals, or reshape public memory. When a ruler wanted to strengthen authority, chroniclers highlighted a favored knight's victories, sometimes expanding minor events into grand triumphs. These narratives traveled quickly through marketplaces and taverns, carried by performers who added flair with every retelling. The effect was powerful. Ordinary people began to associate certain knights with impossible courage or supernatural luck, and this perception influenced how communities judged conflict or governance. Some legends portrayed knights as embodiments of ideal behavior, encouraging subjects to see their rulers as protectors of a noble tradition. Others exaggerated threats and victories to justify political decisions. Over time, these embellished stories hardened into accepted truth, guiding how future generations interpreted wars and alliances. Such legends reveal how medieval societies used storytelling as a tool of influence. Behind many of the tales we celebrate today lies deliberate design meant to steer opinion and shape identity. Some legends were carefully crafted to protect kings rather than knights. In many courts, legends rose not to glorify the knight at the center of a tale, but to shield a king from criticism or controversy. When a military decision failed or a diplomatic move backfired, chroniclers sometimes redirected blame toward or away from specific knights through artfully shaped storytelling. A knight might be depicted as having acted alone even when he followed direct orders, sparing the king from scrutiny. Conversely, he might be portrayed as succeeding through royal insight, even when the victory was entirely his own. These shifts appeared harmless on the surface, but profoundly influenced how people understood power. Legends crafted for royal protection reinforced the idea that the king's authority remained unshakable. They preserved the image of unity even when disagreements smoldered behind closed doors. Knights who became part of these stories often had little control over how they were portrayed, yet their reputations changed dramatically through these narrative adjustments. These legends remind us that medieval storytelling was intertwined with political survival, and truth often bent to preserve stability at the highest levels. Knights frequently manipulated their own myths to shape history. Knights understood that reputation held enormous power. Many learned to guide how others perceived them by subtly shaping the stories told about their deeds. A knight might emphasize details that highlighted bravery while quietly omitting moments of hesitation. He might recount victories with dramatic flair, ensuring that listeners felt awe even if the events had been more modest. Knights used storytelling to establish authority among troops, to reassure allies, or to influence how rulers judged their value. Some encouraged poets or chroniclers to include specific scenes that cast them in a favorable light. Others cultivated mystery by speaking little about their past, allowing rumors to grow in ways that enhanced their image. Over time, personal myths merged with public memory, altering how wars were remembered and how future generations interpreted events. These manipulations were not simply acts of vanity. They shaped political opportunity, determined trust, and influenced alliances. Through calculated myth-making, knights learned to wield narrative as effectively as steel. A knight's personal chronicle could alter the perception of an entire war. Some knights kept detailed accounts of campaigns they experienced, recording motivations, strategies, fears, and triumphs from a personal perspective. These chronicles carried a distinct power because they offered a viewpoint unavailable to rulers or scholars who documented events from afar. A single knight's recounting could elevate certain battles into moments of destiny or downplay others into minor skirmishes. His descriptions of leadership, morale, and hardship shaped how future generations understood the conflict. Chroniclers often wrote with strong emotion, revealing frustration, admiration, or grief that official reports ignored. Their words influenced storytellers, artists, and historians, who relied on these personal testimonies for detail. Over time, a well-written chronicle could overshadow more objective records, becoming the dominant narrative through sheer vividness. The knight who wrote it might never have intended to shape history, yet his experiences, choices, and interpretations created a lens through which entire wars were remembered. Such chronicles demonstrate the immense power of individual perspective. Some knights served as scientists long before the word existed. Curiosity drove many knights to study natural phenomena, mechanical devices, and mathematical patterns that influenced daily life. They observed the motion of stars to navigate during long journeys, experimented with materials to strengthen armour, and examined how weight and leverage shaped weapon performance. Some kept notebooks filled with sketches of mechanisms or diagrams of fortifications. Their interest in understanding how the world worked stemmed from practical need, yet many pursued knowledge for its own sake. In an age without formal scientific language, knights described discoveries through metaphors and observations grounded in careful experimentation. Some corresponded with scholars or monks who shared similar interests, forming small networks of inquiry. Their insights laid groundwork for improvements in engineering, navigation, and architecture. Though they would not have called themselves scientists, their investigative spirit reflects the same search for understanding that drives research today. Their work reminds us that intellectual exploration thrived even in periods dominated by war. Knights studied astronomy and geometry to improve battlefield planning. Astronomy helped knights track seasons, predict weather patterns, and plan long marches with greater accuracy. They learned to read the night sky, to determine direction when no landmarks were visible, and to estimate time by observing the movement of stars. Geometry offered even more tangible benefits. Knights used it to calculate distances across valleys, determine angles for launching projectiles, and design fortifications that maximized defense. By combining these disciplines, they developed strategic awareness that far surpassed simple instinct. A knight who understood spatial relationships could position troops more effectively, identify the strongest or weakest points in enemy lines, and foresee how terrain would influence movement. Their studies also guided architecture for bridges, siege towers, and defensive walls. These mathematical skills, often overlooked in popular depictions, reveal that knights engaged deeply with intellectual tools. Their decisions emerged not only from courage, but from careful measurement and calculated insight. Many knights were early innovators of mechanical technology. Knights frequently collaborated with craftsmen to design devices that enhanced military efficiency or improved daily life. Their first-hand experience with siege engines, armor hinges, and complex weapon mechanisms allowed them to envision new designs that artisans then brought to life. Some knights experimented with pulley systems to lift heavy materials or improve draw strength on large bows. Others explored ways to increase the stability of bridges or the durability of protective gear. Their interest in innovation stemmed from practical necessity, yet many pursued invention with genuine enthusiasm. In regions where resources were limited, creative engineering made the difference between survival and vulnerability. Chronicles mention knights who designed unusual siege devices, improved battlefield communication tools, or crafted specialized riding equipment that transformed mobility. These contributions often went uncredited since formal recognition focused on rulers or guilds. Yet the mechanical insights of knights helped shape the technological landscape of medieval Europe, demonstrating that invention was part of their role as problem solvers. Knights sometimes built experimental weapons centuries ahead of their time. Driven by curiosity and necessity, some knights collaborated with artisans to create weapons that pushed the boundaries of known technology. These devices might involve intricate gearing, unusual forms of propulsion, or combinations of materials rarely used together. Some experimented with early versions of spring-powered mechanisms, while others designed modular weapons that offered interchangeable components for different combat scenarios. Many of these experimental creations never entered widespread use because they were costly to produce or required training unfamiliar to most warriors. Yet the ideas they introduced resurfaced in later centuries when technology advanced enough to support them. Some descriptions in chronicles resemble prototypes of tools that would not become practical until far later in history. These experimental weapons reveal that medieval innovation was far more daring and imaginative than often assumed. Knights did not merely accept existing tools. They envisioned new possibilities and tested them with courage and resourcefulness. The quietest knightly skill was often the most powerful: observation. Observation shaped every aspect of a knight's decision-making. By paying attention to subtle details in the environment, they gained insight into whether shifts, hidden movement, or weaknesses in formation. Knights noticed patterns in human behavior as well, reading uncertainty in posture or determination in the set of a jaw. These clues guided judgments that could save lives. Observation allowed knights to predict when a horse was unsettled, when a shield wall might collapse, or when an ally hesitated at a crucial moment. They trained themselves to see what others overlooked, developing the ability to process information quickly without distraction. This quiet skill strengthened leadership, since a knight who observed carefully understood morale, fatigue, and opportunity with unusual clarity. Observation often distinguished an ordinary warrior from a remarkable one. It transformed instinct into informed action, proving that awareness could be as decisive as strength. Knights used environmental details to predict an opponent's intentions. The landscape served as a vast map of clues for knights who learned to read it with precision. Footprints revealed direction and speed, while disturbed foliage hinted at recent movement. The positioning of campfires indicated discipline, and the arrangement of sentries exposed an opponent's confidence or fear. Knights observed dust clouds to judge approaching forces, and listened to echoes to determine the distance of marching soldiers. Even the behavior of birds or animals offered signals. Sudden silence might indicate hidden presence, while startled movement pointed toward paths recently crossed. By analyzing these details, knights anticipated ambushes, predicted troop deployment, and adapted strategy long before direct confrontation. This skill turned natural surroundings into a source of intelligence. It allowed knights to take informed risks or avoid traps entirely. Understanding how to interpret the environment transformed perception into tactical advantage, demonstrating that success in battle often began long before swords touched. Knights read battlefields the way scholars read books. Experienced knights approached a battlefield as if it contained lines of meaning written across every ridge, shadow, and cluster of movement. Before any command was given, they examined the ground with thoughtful precision. The height of a hill, the softness of soil, the placement of vegetation, and the openness of a valley all revealed opportunities or dangers. They assessed how wind direction might carry dust or smoke, how sunlight might blind one side during specific hours, and how uneven ground could disrupt mounted charges. Knights also studied the behavior of troops, noting which units held firm posture and which shifted nervously. From these details, they inferred discipline, morale, and readiness. They could identify weak points in formations or recognize when an opponent attempted deception through staged rearranging of forces. Their ability to interpret this vast array of information allowed them to act with confidence long before weapons crossed. To such knights, the battlefield was not chaos. It was a textured narrative filled with clues that guided decision and strategy. Some knights could sense ambushes using pure intuition. Knights who survived many campaigns developed an instinct so refined that they sometimes detected hidden danger before physical evidence appeared. This intuition emerged from years of exposure to subtle patterns. A sudden change in wind, an unnatural silence among animals, footprints spaced too carefully, or the faint tension among fellow soldiers could awaken a feeling that something was wrong. These knights learned to trust these sensations because experience had taught them that the mind notices more than conscious thought can articulate. Intuition guided them to halt columns, redirect scouts, or investigate suspicious terrain. Their actions often saved lives, preventing entire units from walking into traps designed with great cunning. This ability did not stem from magic or guesswork. It reflected a keen awareness sharpened through hardship, exhaustion, and relentless training. Knights who possessed this gift earned immense respect. Comrades looked to them during uncertain moments, knowing that survival sometimes depended on the quiet warning of someone who sensed danger with extraordinary clarity. Knights were trained to control fear until it became a tactical tool. Rather than attempting to eliminate fear, knights learned to transform it into heightened awareness. Instructors taught that fear sharpened reflexes and illuminated danger that complacency might overlook. Trainees practiced confronting controlled stress until their minds no longer froze under pressure. They learned to breathe steadily when panic threatened to overwhelm them, and to acknowledge fear as a natural companion rather than an enemy. Knights also studied how fear affected others. By recognizing signs of anxiety in opponents, they could exploit hesitation or predict retreat. Understanding their own fear allowed them to approach battle with strategic discipline. Instead of denying emotion, they channeled it into focus and energy. This practice turned fear from a liability into a form of guidance. Knights who mastered this skill stood firm when others faltered, maintaining clear judgment in the most chaotic moments. Their relationship with fear reveals the depth of psychological training that shaped medieval warfare. Medieval knightly courage was a practiced art, not an inborn trait. Courage in medieval knighthood did not arise from natural boldness alone. It was cultivated through repeated exposure to difficulty and uncertainty. Trainees faced challenges designed to test their resolve, from climbing hazardous terrain to participating in controlled combat scenarios that pushed them beyond comfort. Through these experiences, they learned to act despite fear, rather than in the absence of it. Courage became a deliberate choice grounded in discipline and preparation. Knights also observed mentors who modeled steady composure, absorbing lessons about posture, voice, and thoughtful movement. Rituals and vows reinforced their commitment, reminding them that bravery served not only personal honor, but the well-being of those who depended on them. Over time, this practice shaped their identity. Courage became an element of character maintained through continual effort. It was never assumed to be permanent. Knights renewed it with each decision to confront danger with clarity rather than impulse. Their courage reflects dedicated training rather than effortless fearlessness. Knights used breathing rituals to maintain calm under extreme pressure. Breath control played an essential role in managing fear and maintaining focus during overwhelming moments. Knights practiced rhythmic patterns that steadied the mind and prevented panic from twisting into confusion. These rituals slowed the heartbeat, sharpened concentration, and created a sense of grounding even amid roaring battle or intense negotiation. Some exercises were performed before combat to prepare the body for sustained exertion. Others were used during moments of rest to restore clarity. Knights learned that shallow, erratic breathing weakened judgment, while deep, controlled breaths restored balance. This discipline helped them endure exhaustion and remain attentive to subtle changes in their surroundings. Breathwork also supported emotional resilience, helping knights recover from shock or sudden fear. These practices predated modern psychological techniques, yet mirrored them closely. Breath became a quiet companion that allowed knights to remain steady when chaos threatened to fracture their resolve. Some knightly orders practiced meditative exercises unknown to most Europeans. Certain knightly orders incorporated contemplative rituals that blended spiritual devotion with mental discipline. Members gathered in silence, focusing on internal stillness as a way to strengthen patience and deepen awareness. These exercises varied from controlled visualization to extended periods of mindful observation. Through them, knights learned to detach from immediate distractions and view situations with greater clarity. This training served them during negotiations, where calm presence influenced tense discussions, and on the battlefield, where mental steadiness allowed them to react thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Some orders believed that inner serenity created alignment between intention and action, producing more decisive and ethical behavior. These practices differed from common European customs of the time, yet they spread quietly among those who recognized their value. Their existence reveals that knighthood involved more than martial skill. It required cultivation of the mind through introspection and disciplined reflection. Knights managed exhaustion in ways that modern athletes would admire. Campaigns demanded relentless endurance. Knights traveled long distances, often with inadequate rest, yet were expected to remain alert and capable of sudden action. To meet these demands, they developed methods for preserving strength. They learned to regulate pace, conserve energy during long marches, and shift between bursts of intensity and controlled recovery. Specialized stretching routines kept muscles flexible beneath heavy armor. Knights practiced eating patterns that supported sustained stamina and hydration techniques that prevented collapse during heat or cold. They also mastered micro-rest, brief periods of controlled relaxation that restored mental clarity without full sleep. Their understanding of bodily limits was surprisingly advanced, guided by experience and careful observation. These practices allowed knights to remain effective when others might falter. Their approach to endurance demonstrates a sophisticated relationship with physical well-being, grounded in necessity and honed through rigorous habit. Some knights learned to fight through injury using specialized techniques. In a world where medical care was limited, knights trained to continue fighting even after sustaining wounds. They practiced shifting weight to accommodate damaged limbs, adjusting grip strength when hands were injured, and modifying footwork to protect vulnerable areas. Instructors taught them how to redirect pain through breathing and mental focus, preventing panic from clouding judgment. These techniques allowed knights to remain functional in moments when survival depended on resilience rather than perfection. They also learned how to minimize further harm by recognizing movements that risked worsening an injury. Some knights carried simple remedies that eased swelling or slowed bleeding until proper care could be reached. Their ability to adapt under physical strain reflected dedication and deep understanding of their own bodies. It demonstrated that survival in medieval warfare often depended on adaptability rather than flawless execution. A knight's survival often depended on his ability to read human nature. Knights interacted with allies, enemies, and civilians in constantly shifting circumstances. Their safety often hinged on interpreting subtle cues in behavior. A slight change in tone, a forced smile, or a rigid posture could indicate hidden resentment or impending betrayal. Knights developed sensitivity to these signals through experience. They learned to judge whether a promise could be trusted or whether a negotiation masked underlying hostility. Understanding human nature allowed them to anticipate conflict before it erupted and to adjust their actions accordingly. In battle, It helped them predict when an opponent might retreat or when desperation would lead to reckless aggression. In courts, it guided them through complex webs of ambition and intrigue. This perceptive skill served as a form of armour, protecting knights from dangers that steel alone could not deflect. Knights studied body language long before it had a name. Although the formal study of body language came much later, knights intuitively recognized its importance. They observed how stance revealed confidence or fear, how eye movement indicated deception or sincerity, and how posture changed with intention. Knights used this awareness to negotiate, command, and survive. In training, they learned to mask their own uncertainty by adopting strong, steady movements that projected readiness. They also learned to exploit hesitation in opponents by striking at the precise moment when doubt became visible. Outside combat, body language helped them navigate courtly encounters filled with subtle competition. Knights who mastered this skill gained advantages in every arena. They understood people not only through words, but through the silent vocabulary of motion and expression. Their intuitive knowledge shaped decisions that influenced both personal safety and broader political outcomes. Some knights became masters at anticipating betrayal. Knights who served in courts filled with ambition and shifting alliances understood that danger rarely arrived with open declaration. It often entered quietly through false smiles, hesitant gestures, or words that carried mixed intention. These knights developed an almost uncanny sensitivity to subtle changes in behavior. They noticed when a familiar servant avoided eye contact, or when a council member spoke with unusual courtesy. They paid attention to patterns, such as unexpected delays in correspondence, or sudden eagerness from individuals who once displayed indifference. Through experience, they learned which small inconsistencies hinted at deeper threat. Their awareness extended beyond individuals. They examined how groups behaved, noting when factions whispered more than usual, or when overly scripted interactions replaced natural conversation. Over time, this vigilance became a refined skill. It allowed them to protect their lords from conspiracies that might otherwise have exploded into violence. These knights did not rely on suspicion alone. They gathered information patiently and interpreted human behavior with disciplined calm. Their mastery of anticipating betrayal kept courts stable during turbulent periods, reminding everyone that perception could be a powerful shield. Knights sometimes fought duels intended to prevent entire wars. When tensions escalated between rival territories and negotiations reached deadlock, leaders occasionally agreed to submit their dispute to the strength and honor of two champions. These duels represented a collective hope that bloodshed on a small scale could prevent devastation on a massive one. The chosen knights trained intensely in preparation for these solemn confrontations, carrying the weight of thousands of lives upon their shoulders. They entered the field with full understanding that their victory or defeat could determine the future of entire regions. Spectators gathered in tense silence, aware that the outcome held enormous consequence. The duel itself followed strict ritual, so no outcome could be questioned. Once resolved, the losing side often accepted the result to avoid long-term conflict, while the victor bore new responsibilities shaped by the terms of agreement. These duels reflected a profound belief that controlled violence could preserve peace. They also showed deep trust in the abilities and integrity of the knights selected, for each fighter stood not only for personal honor, but for the stability of their homeland. Other duels were so symbolic that their outcomes changed dynasties. Beyond preventing wars, some duels resolved disputes involving inheritance, legitimacy, or claims to leadership. These confrontations carried significance far beyond physical combat. The combatants embodied ideals, lineages, and vast webs of political expectation. A single decisive moment could shift the balance of power across a kingdom. Families awaited these duels with apprehension, for the result might confirm or erase generations of ambition. The ritual surrounding such matches was meticulously planned. Neutral witnesses observed every action to ensure fairness. Ceremonial gestures acknowledged the gravity of what was at stake. When a knight triumphed, the symbolic message resonated through courts and villages alike. New alliances formed immediately as nobles adjusted their loyalties. In some cases, psalms were composed to commemorate the event, cementing its importance in cultural memory. These duels were not simply tests of skill. They acted as turning points where personal courage intersected with the political fate of dynasties, shaping the stories that future generations accepted as truth. Duel rituals followed rules that were more complex than many laws. Formal duels were governed by intricate procedures designed to ensure fairness, legitimacy, and clarity of intention. Before entering combat, both knights agreed upon the terms, including weapon type, armor style, and conditions for ending the fight. Officials inspected every piece of equipment to prevent advantages gained through hidden alterations. Ritual declarations gave each fighter the opportunity to state their claim and acknowledge the seriousness of the encounter. The ground itself received careful preparation. Stones and debris were removed so neither combatant suffered from unpredictable footing. Some duels included symbolic moments, such as touching a designated marker or saluting appointed judges. These customs transformed the duel into a solemn ritual that reflected shared cultural belief about justice and honor. The complexity of the rules indicated how deeply society respected the duel as a method for resolving conflict. The process balanced physical confrontation with legal structure, revealing a unique blend of tradition, law, and personal responsibility that guided medieval life. Knights sometimes trained in mock battles so large they resembled real wars. Training for war required more than isolated drills. To prepare for the confusion and unpredictability of real conflict, knights participated in vast mock engagements that involved coordinated movements, shifting formations, and simulated attacks. These events taught knights how to maintain awareness amid noise and rapid change. Commanders used them to test communication strategies, observing which signals worked effectively across wide distances. Participants learned how terrain influenced movement, discovering how hills, marshes, and dense vegetation created tactical challenges. These mock battles also revealed weaknesses. A commander might realize that certain units reacted too slowly under pressure, or that specific formations failed when confronted with sudden changes. Knights practiced supporting one another, adapting to unexpected difficulties, and executing orders with precision. Although weapons were blunted or symbolic, the emotional atmosphere felt intense. The exercises demanded endurance and focus comparable to genuine combat. Through such large-scale practice, knights gained confidence in their ability to function within organized units, which strengthened armies long before they faced real opponents. Tournaments became stages where reputation could rise or crumble in a day. Tournaments offered knights a rare opportunity to display skill before audiences that included nobles, potential patrons, and influential leaders. A strong performance could elevate a knight's status instantly. Crowds admired boldness, grace, and strategic intelligence. Word of success spread quickly across regions, carried by heralds and traveling performers. A knight who excelled in tournament combat often gained access to prestigious circles, new responsibilities, or advantageous alliances. Yet the risks were equally significant. A poor showing or a moment of undisciplined behavior damaged credibility. Because tournaments occurred in public view, mistakes carved lasting impressions. Beyond combat, knights were judged on courtesy, composure, and willingness to adhere to established codes of conduct. Every gesture mattered. Even interactions outside the arena influenced perception. Tournaments therefore served as testing grounds for character as much as for skill. They shaped careers, determined social mobility, and offered knights a chance to redefine themselves through action rather than lineage. Some tournaments were secretly designed to test political loyalty. Rulers often used tournaments as subtle examinations of allegiance. By observing how knights engaged one another under pressure, leaders gathered insight into hidden alliances, simmering rivalries, or emerging ambitions. A knight who cooperated respectfully with rivals demonstrated reliability, while one who displayed unnecessary aggression raised concern. Organizers sometimes arranged pairings intentionally, placing knights with unresolved tension into the same round to see whether they would prioritize restraint or retaliate impulsively. These observations informed decisions about appointments, military command, and diplomatic assignments. Knights aware of these undertones approached tournaments cautiously, recognizing that spectators included individuals evaluating more than prowess. Success required emotional discipline and political awareness in addition to technical skill. These tournaments illustrate how medieval culture intertwined spectacle with governance, blending entertainment with subtle strategy. Knights could win land and titles through tournament victories. Certain tournaments offered prizes that extended far beyond trophies. Victorious knights sometimes earned parcels of land, honorary positions, or noble titles. Such rewards had profound consequences. Land ownership granted economic stability and influence within local communities. Titles opened doors to political participation, allowing knights to shape decisions at higher levels of authority. To win such prizes, knights trained with remarkable intensity. Competitors included seasoned fighters whose reputations attracted large crowds. Success required strategic thinking, physical endurance, and mastery of weapon techniques. The possibility of life-changing rewards transformed tournaments into avenues of social advancement. Knights from modest backgrounds could rise into prominence through exceptional performance. Victories demonstrated that medieval society, though structured by hierarchy, allowed room for merit. These prizes shaped destinies, proving that martial excellence could alter the course of a family's future. Some knights made their entire fortune through competitive combat. A small group of knights traveled from tournament to tournament, relying on victory as their primary means of income. Their livelihood depended on consistent performance, and they approached each competition with disciplined preparation. These knights learned how to read audiences, adjusting their style to maximize excitement without sacrificing safety. Organizers valued their presence because skilled fighters drew crowds, increasing the prestige of the event. Through their success, these knights accumulated prize money, earned gifts from nobles, and secured patronage that supported long-term stability. They invested in superior equipment, recognizing that high-quality armor and weapons increased their chances of success. Some developed personal followings, with spectators seeking out their matches in anticipation of remarkable displays. Their careers demonstrated that knighthood included opportunities beyond traditional service. Competitive combat offered a path shaped by courage, discipline, and constant movement across regions. Knights sometimes wore disguises to compete without revealing their name. Knights who wished to test their abilities without scrutiny occasionally masked their identity. They altered heraldic colors, modified decorative patterns, or used equipment that concealed familiar features. Competing anonymously allowed them to escape expectations tied to lineage or past achievements. It also enabled them to face rivals freely without creating political complications. Spectators often became enthralled by mysterious fighters whose skill exceeded ordinary standards. Rumors spread quickly as audiences attempted to guess the concealed identity. Some knights revealed themselves at the end of the contest, transforming the final moment into dramatic spectacle. Others kept their identity hidden forever, leaving behind stories of an enigmatic figure whose grace and power captured imagination. These disguised entries added unpredictability to tournaments and emphasized the performative nature of medieval competition. A knight's identity could be hidden behind a single stripe of color. In a world where heraldry spoke as loudly as words, a simple stripe of color could serve as a powerful shield of anonymity. Knights who wished to move unseen within a tournament or a politically charged gathering sometimes altered only a single narrow band on their armor or surcoat. To an untrained eye, the change appeared insignificant, but to those fluent in heraldic language, it created just enough uncertainty to conceal identity without raising suspicion. This subtle disguise allowed knights to test their abilities without expectation or scrutiny. It also offered protection when navigating tense environments where powerful families watched every gesture. A concealed stripe could grant freedom to observe rivals, to participate in contests without influencing political alliances, or to reveal true skill unclouded by reputation. The simplicity of the gesture made it brilliant. It required no elaborate costume nor complete reinvention. The knight remained entirely present, yet safely veiled beneath a single stroke of color that altered how the world perceived him. This practice highlights how deeply medieval society relied on visual cues and how a quiet change in detail could reshape the understanding of everyone around. Some knights competed under secret allegiances that changed everything. Not all contests were purely demonstrations of skill. Beneath the shimmer of armor and the roar of cheering crowds, knights sometimes entered tournaments while pledged to undisclosed loyalties. These hidden allegiances shaped their decisions in ways that few spectators ever realized. A knight might seek to humble a rival knightly house, not for personal pride, but to weaken a political opponent. Others entered solely to protect a covert ally who required support without public association. Some participated as agents of distant lords whose influence reached far beyond the tournament grounds. These secret bonds could transform the meaning of every stride, every exchange of blows, and every carefully chosen gesture of courtesy or restraint. A match that appeared spontaneous might actually be a deliberate performance meant to guide political interpretation. Knights who carried these hidden loyalties had to maintain perfect composure, ensuring their true intentions remained invisible. Their ability to maneuver through spectacle while advancing subtle strategies demonstrates that tournament fields often hosted more than athletic contest. They were arenas where hidden purposes shaped outcomes that rippled through courts and kingdoms. Knights developed complex ethical rules for moments of captivity. Captivity presented unique moral challenges, and knights responded by developing elaborate ethical systems that guided behavior when freedom was lost. These rules sought to preserve dignity, protect honor, and maintain stability even under dire circumstances. Captured knights were expected to conduct themselves with restraint, avoiding actions that would harm host communities or undermine future negotiations. They were forbidden from exploiting generosity or attempting escape when such attempts might jeopardize innocent people. At the same time, captors were bound by expectations of fair treatment. Knights believed that honorable captivity strengthened civilization by creating a predictable structure in moments of vulnerability. These ethical codes extended to matters of speech, loyalty, and conduct. Captives were expected to remain truthful, uphold their previous commitments, and demonstrate respect toward those holding them. Knights carried these values so deeply that violating them threatened lifelong reputation. Through these rules, captivity became not only a test of endurance, but a solemn examination of character. It revealed which knights upheld their ideals when stripped of advantage, proving that honor persisted even behind fortified walls. Wealthy captives could transform the economics of war. In medieval society, the capture of a noble or wealthy knight carried financial significance that could shift the balance of entire campaigns. Rather than seeking immediate harm, captors often preserved valuable prisoners for ransom. These negotiations became major economic events, influencing the resources available to both sides of a conflict. A large ransom could fund months of military activity, purchase supplies, or strengthen fortifications. Conversely, the family of the captive might face heavy financial strain, reshaping alliances or prompting desperate political concessions. Captive knights sometimes lived in relative comfort while awaiting ransom because their well-being directly affected the price their families would pay. This unusual blend of warfare and economics created a complex relationship between enemies. A captured knight became a living asset whose value fluctuated with reputation, political importance, and strategic necessity. Some prisoners even advised their captors on political matters, knowing their insight increased their worth. The ransom system reveals how deeply intertwined financial strategy and military conflict were, shaping decisions that extended far beyond the battlefield. Some knights treated captivity as a stage for diplomacy. Captivity often isolated knights from the immediate chaos of war, creating unexpected opportunities for negotiation. Some knights used this period to engage in thoughtful discussion with captors, offering perspectives on shared interests or regional tensions. They understood that respectful conversation could soften hostility and uncover possibilities for peace. In certain cases, captives forged lasting friendships with those responsible for their confinement, discovering common values or mutual respect. These relationships sometimes influenced future treaties or eased conflict between rival houses. A knight skilled in diplomacy recognized that captivity placed him in a unique position to observe his captor's motivations, weaknesses, and aspirations. By responding with patience and intelligence, he could guide conversations toward outcomes that benefited both sides. Such diplomatic efforts strengthened a knight's reputation upon release, proving that wisdom and communication could achieve what brute strength could not. Captivity therefore became not only an ordeal but an arena where character and intellect shaped political transformation. Honor in captivity was considered a test greater than victory. Victory revealed strength, but captivity revealed integrity. Medieval culture viewed the conduct of a captive knight as a profound demonstration of character. When stripped of command, weapons, and freedom, a knight faced a spiritual trial that surpassed the glory of triumph. He was expected to maintain courtesy, uphold promises, and refuse actions that would tarnish his lineage. Many knights believed that captivity exposed the truth of one's nature, for honor must endure even when advantage disappeared. A captive who behaved with dignity returned home with renewed respect, often earning admiration greater than that gained through battlefield success. This belief shaped how knights approached hardship. They viewed captivity not as humiliation, but as an opportunity to demonstrate valor through patience, reflection, and steadfast adherence to principle. Their conduct provided reassurance to allies and set a standard for future generations. Through this perspective, medieval society affirmed that honor was not dependent on status, but on the unwavering guidance of conscience. Some knights became renowned for their skill in negotiation. Knights known for clarity of thought, steady temperament, and persuasive insight often gained reputations that extended far beyond their martial abilities. These individuals served as mediators during crises, stepping into disputes that threatened fragile alliances. Their credibility stemmed from martial status combined with personal discipline, giving weight to their words. Successful negotiators understood the emotional landscape of both sides. They listened carefully, identified shared interests, and framed solutions that preserved dignity for all involved. Their ability to calm tensions and guide conversations made them invaluable to kings and nobles seeking stability. Some knights prevented wars through negotiation alone, transforming what could have been violent struggles into agreements that shaped entire regions. Their influence reflected a simple truth. True strength included the ability to resolve conflict without drawing a blade. Knights sometimes brokered peace with a single conversation. Certain historical moments hinged upon the presence of a knight who possessed extraordinary composure and insight. When rival leaders faced impasse, a respected knight could intervene with words grounded in fairness and clear understanding of consequence. By reframing arguments or revealing overlooked possibilities, these knights unlocked solutions that neither side could see alone. Their tone mattered as much as their message. A calm voice softened anger, while a steady posture conveyed sincerity. Some knights traveled long distances to deliver such counsel, knowing that a timely conversation could spare communities from devastation. Their ability to transform hostility into agreement demonstrated that peace required not only opportunity, but also individuals willing to step forward with courage shaped through reflection. These quiet triumphs, though less celebrated than victories in battle, carried immense significance for those whose lives depended on the outcome. A knight's reputation could influence entire kingdoms. The reputation of a knight spread through whispers, songs, and formal reports until it reached distant courts where rulers weighed its meaning carefully. A knight known for unwavering loyalty or exceptional judgment could strengthen diplomatic trust between territories. Conversely, a knight suspected of ruthless behavior or shifting allegiance could inspire anxiety even in kingdoms that had never encountered him directly. Rulers studied these reputations before forming alliances, granting command positions, or inviting knights to negotiations. The mere presence of a widely respected knight could reassure communities during uncertainty, while the rumor of an approaching infamous knight could alter military planning. Reputation became a form of political currency, shaping decisions that reached far beyond the individual. Knights understood this and guarded their public image with intense discipline, knowing that the perception surrounding their name held power equal to any weapon. Some knightly names were feared far beyond their homelands. In regions where stories traveled faster than armies, certain knightly names gained chilling resonance. Tales of their decisive victories or unyielding resolve spread from village to village, until these figures became symbols of unstoppable force. Even those who had never witnessed them firsthand felt the weight of their reputation. Commanders planning defenses considered the psychological impact of facing such individuals, recognizing that fear could weaken resolve before combat began. These knights did not cultivate terror for its own sake. Their renown arose from consistent demonstration of skill, strategy, and determination. Yet once their names entered collective memory, they shaped the emotional landscape of entire regions. Some adversaries surrendered simply upon learning that a feared knight had joined the opposing force. This influence reveals that power in medieval warfare extended far beyond physical confrontation. The human imagination magnified the presence of certain warriors, turning them into figures whose names carried as much force as entire battalions. Other knights became beloved icons across rival borders. While some knights inspired fear, others became cherished symbols of honor, even among those they once faced in battle. Their conduct, marked by fairness, restraint, and compassion toward prisoners and civilians, earned admiration that surpassed political divisions. Songs celebrating their deeds traveled into enemy territories, where listeners discovered that the knight's reputation seemed to represent something universal about courage and dignity. When such knights returned, captured nobles unharmed, or offered mercy during moments of chaos, they demonstrated a spirit that resonated widely. Communities who might otherwise distrust outsiders spoke of these knights with warmth, telling stories that emphasized shared humanity instead of conflict. Envoys from rival courts sometimes sought audience with them, wishing to meet individuals whose reputations suggested admirable character. These knights fostered quiet bridges between rival lands simply by being consistent in their principles. Their influence revealed that respect could cross borders even during periods of tension. They became living proof that honor held meaning beyond allegiance, shaping narratives that softened hostility and encouraged understanding across cultural divides. Knights often became symbols of hope for ordinary people. For villagers and townsfolk who lived under constant threat of war, famine, and unpredictable rule, knights sometimes represented a rare source of reassurance. Their presence signaled strength guided by principle. Stories spread of knights who protected travelers, defended communities from raiders, or advocated for fairness when local leaders abused power. To ordinary people, these actions held immense emotional weight. A knight who treated them with kindness or listened carefully to their concerns became a figure of profound influence. Tales about such deeds grew with each retelling, weaving hope into daily life. Even when knights traveled far from their homeland, memories of their actions lingered, inspiring young listeners to imagine futures grounded in justice. These knights did not always hold high rank, yet their compassion shaped how entire communities interpreted the ideals of chivalry. They became symbols that guided moral expectation, offering comfort in times of fear. Through them, ordinary people found reason to believe that courage and goodness could stand against hardship. Many knightly stories spread faster than written records could travel. Before widespread literacy, spoken tales served as the primary means of preserving history. Knights who accomplished remarkable feats found their exploits carried far beyond borders through merchants, musicians, and traveling storytellers. These stories often reached distant villages long before any official chronicle documented the events. Listeners added their own embellishments, transforming simple encounters into grand adventures. This oral tradition meant that a knight's reputation could grow at astonishing speed, shaped by imagination as much as truth. Some stories expanded until they blurred the line between history and legend. In taverns and marketplaces, people repeated these tales with excitement, eager to pass on news of bravery, sacrifice, or clever strategy. Because spoken stories traveled through diverse cultures, they adapted to local customs, turning knights into figures who reflected community values. This rapid spread of narrative demonstrates how medieval society relied on storytelling to understand its own identity. Knights lived both in reality and in the ever-expanding world of collective memory. Some knights inspired cultural movements that lasted centuries. A single knight whose life embodied powerful ideals could influence art, literature, and social values long after his lifetime. Poets transformed his deeds into allegories. Painters captured symbolic versions of his struggles, and philosophers used his choices to illustrate reflections on honor and sacrifice. In some regions, entire generations adopted the knight's principles, shaping codes of behavior that extended far beyond warfare. Traditions of courtly love, romantic quests, or moral virtue often began with a knight whose actions awakened the imagination of artists and thinkers. Festivals commemorated these individuals, blending historical memory with cultural celebration. Over time, these movements influenced how societies understood nobility, ethics, and aspiration. The knight himself might not have intended such impact. Yet through stories that magnified his character, communities found inspiration that endured for centuries. These cultural legacies demonstrate the deep emotional resonance that knightly ideals held in medieval life. Knightly orders used rituals that created powerful social bonds. Membership in a knightly order involved more than shared purpose. It included ceremonies designed to deepen trust and unity among members. These rituals often incorporated symbolic gestures, spoken commitments, and shared experiences that bound knights together as tightly as family. Some rituals honored past generations, reminding members that they carried a legacy of responsibility. Others focused on mutual support, ensuring that each knight understood the importance of protecting fellow members. These practices fostered a profound sense of belonging. Knights relied on the strength of these bonds during battle, diplomacy, and long journeys. Rituals also helped orders maintain discipline by reinforcing values that shaped decisions. Even after a knight traveled far from his companions, the memory of these ceremonies sustained his sense of identity. The powerful cohesion created by such rituals enabled knightly orders to act with remarkable coordination and resilience. Some orders functioned like early international networks. Knightly orders that expanded across borders created systems of communication and support that resembled early global networks. Members could travel through unfamiliar regions and find shelter, supplies, or trusted counsel from fellow knights who shared the same vows. These networks allowed information to move swiftly between distant locations, shaping political decisions and military strategies. Orders organized resources efficiently, ensuring that knights stationed in remote areas could receive medical care, food, and reinforcements when necessary. They also maintained shared archives that recorded treaties, disputes, and cultural knowledge. By connecting individuals from different cultures, these networks encouraged the exchange of ideas and diplomatic understanding. Their coordinated structure allowed them to influence events on a scale far beyond that of any single knight or small regional group. Their reach demonstrates how medieval institutions could operate with sophistication that anticipated modern forms of international cooperation. The most secretive orders left behind mysteries that still puzzle historians. Some knightly orders maintained strict secrecy about their practices, symbols, and internal hierarchy. Their meetings occurred behind guarded doors, and members swore solemn vows never to reveal sensitive information. Because these orders recorded little in writing, much of their history vanished over time. Archaeological discoveries occasionally uncover artifacts marked with enigmatic emblems whose meaning remains unknown. Scholars debate the purpose of these orders, wondering whether they engaged in specialized diplomacy, protected certain knowledge, or carried out covert missions. Legends attribute extraordinary deeds to them, though separating truth from imagination proves difficult. The secrecy that once protected their work now shrouds them in mystery, inviting endless curiosity. These hidden orders remind us that medieval society held layers of complexity beyond what survives in official records. Their shadows continue to provoke questions that have yet to be answered. Knights were sometimes trained in ciphered communication. In times of conflict and delicate diplomacy, knights needed reliable methods for transmitting information without risking interception. To solve this, some received training in simple ciphers and coded messages. They learned how to disguise meaning within ordinary language or embed instructions in patterns of color, gesture, or symbol. When traveling through dangerous territory, these codes allowed them to communicate with allies discreetly. Some ciphers required knowledge of specific poems, prayers, or genealogical sequences that acted as keys. Knights entrusted with these systems carried enormous responsibility, since a single encoded message could influence strategy or preserve fragile alliances. Their ability to protect sensitive information demonstrated intellectual discipline equal to their martial skill. Cipher training reveals that medieval communication involved subtlety and foresight, contradicting the notion that the IRA relied solely on brute strength. Hidden messages once traveled between knights in plain sight. Knights who needed to share confidential information without attracting suspicion often used everyday objects as carriers for hidden communication. Patterns woven into belts, stitching on sleeves, or even arrangements of feathers on a horse's reins conveyed meaning recognizable only to intended recipients. These messages allowed knights to coordinate plans, warn of danger, or confirm allegiance without written records. Because the signals blended seamlessly into daily attire, outsiders rarely noticed anything unusual. The effectiveness of these visual codes depended on restraint and simplicity. A single misplaced detail could alter meaning entirely. Knights who mastered this technique relied on sharp memory and mutual trust. Their ability to communicate secretly while appearing completely ordinary shows how intelligence work existed long before formal espionage systems. Such quiet exchanges played crucial roles in moments when open conversation could place lives at risk. Some knights carried maps so rare they were considered treasures. Accurate maps held immense value in medieval life, and some knights possessed charts so detailed or unusual that they were guarded like precious relics. These maps might depict mountain passes known only to a few travelers, coastlines shaped by years of exploration, or routes connecting distant cultures. Knights used them to guide armies, plan diplomatic missions, or navigate unfamiliar regions with confidence. Because such maps were difficult to produce and often based on first-hand observation, they represented knowledge that could elevate a knight's importance within a court. Losing a map of great value risked compromising strategic advantage. Some knights stored these works in protective cases, while others committed every detail to memory to prevent capture. Their reverence for maps reveals how crucial awareness of the wider world was to medieval strategy. These treasured documents allowed knights to move through landscapes with insight that could determine the success of entire expeditions. Knightly expeditions traveled far beyond what schools commonly teach. Historical records taught in most classrooms capture only a fraction of the journeys knights undertook. Many traveled far beyond their kingdoms in service of exploration, diplomacy, or spiritual quests that carried them into landscapes rarely documented. They crossed deserts where wind erased paths within moments, sailed along coasts illuminated by unfamiliar constellations, and ventured into mountain ranges where languages, customs, and warfare practices differed from anything known in Europe. These journeys exposed knights to new ideas about governance, trade, and science that broadened their understanding of the world. Some traveled as escorts for merchants seeking distant markets. Others accompanied small diplomatic missions, tasked with building relationships across immense cultural divides. Along the way, they recorded observations about terrain, climate, and human behavior that later influenced strategic decision-making at home. The breadth of these expeditions demonstrates that medieval knighthood extended well beyond local conflict. It involved encounters with distant civilizations, whose knowledge shaped emerging perspectives on geography and interconnectedness. Their journeys remind us that the medieval world was far more expansive, curious, and interconnected than many imagine. Some knights ventured into lands considered impossible to reach. There were knights whose determination pushed them into territories that many of their contemporaries believed unreachable. They followed faint rumors of distant kingdoms, navigated deep forests untouched by roads, and ascended rugged mountain passes where icy winds challenged every step. Driven by curiosity, duty, or spiritual longing, these knights persevered where others turned back. Their encounters with unfamiliar cultures broadened their sense of humanity and influenced the stories they carried home. Some discovered advanced fortification techniques used by remote civilizations. Others learned medicinal practices unknown in Europe, or witnessed forms of governance that challenged their assumptions about power. Returning from such journeys required extraordinary resilience. They crossed treacherous rivers, endured scarcity, and survived climates drastically different from their homeland. Their successful passage into these forbidden regions inspired awe among their peers, turning them into living examples of perseverance. These unexplored lands, once considered unreachable, became part of the medieval imagination because of knights who dared to attempt the impossible. Knights sometimes returned with knowledge that transformed Europe. The return of a knight from a distant expedition often brought home more than stories. It introduced new concepts that reshaped military tactics, architecture, trade, and even philosophy. Some knights learned about advanced construction methods that improved castle design. Others brought insights into cavalry formations used by foreign armies, prompting dramatic changes in training across European knightly schools. Exposure to unfamiliar crops, fabrics, or metals influenced economic development as merchants sought to import valuable goods. Knights also shared observations about navigational techniques, expanding understanding of the world's geography. Beyond practical knowledge, they carried ideas that shifted cultural and moral frameworks. Encounters with societies that practiced different forms of justice or spirituality encouraged debate among scholars and religious thinkers. These returning knights acted as bridges between civilizations. Their experiences played a significant role in broadening medieval perspectives and fostering intellectual growth that continues to influence modern understanding of cultural exchange. Knightly armor designs were influenced by distant cultures. Although often associated with strictly European tradition, knightly armor reveals a long history of adaptation inspired by encounters with foreign warriors. Knights who traveled abroad observed protective equipment crafted from materials and shapes unfamiliar to them. They saw lamellar armor composed of overlapping plates, lightweight shields that moved fluidly with the body, and helmets shaped to deflect arrows at sharp angles. Upon returning home, they described these innovations to skilled armorers who adapted certain elements into European designs. Some incorporated flexible joint structures that improved mobility. Others experimented with new plate arrangements that enhanced protection without sacrificing speed. Influences also appeared in decorative styles, blending motifs from distant cultures into the engravings and patterns of European armor. These blended forms illustrate that knightly equipment was not static. It evolved continuously through exchange, observation, and experimentation. The armor worn across Europe carried the imprint of global interaction long before modern globalization took shape. Some knights adopted techniques learned from foreign warriors. Knights who engaged with warriors from distant regions often discovered combat methods that differed from traditional European systems. They observed how certain riders guided their horses with subtle weight shifts rather than strong reins, how foot soldiers used fluid movements to evade heavy strikes, and how archers managed extraordinary accuracy through disciplined breath control. Some knights adopted these techniques into their own training, realizing that versatility strengthened survival. They practiced new stances, experimented with weapon grips unfamiliar to their homeland, and blended foreign strategies with their established skills. These innovations enriched knightly combat, creating hybrid forms that surpassed earlier limitations. Upon returning home, they taught these methods to eager students who sensed that the world offered far more knowledge than any one tradition. This exchange highlights the adaptability of knights who valued learning wherever it could be found. Knights studied the tactics of civilizations they never encountered. Even without traveling great distances, knights sought to understand the strategies of cultures described in travelers' accounts, scholarly manuscripts, or battlefield reports. They examined descriptions of disciplined formations used in distant empires, studying how tightly coordinated foot soldiers created barriers that cavalry struggled to break. They learned about desert warfare, where speed and deception outweighed heavy armor, and about coastal tactics where battles relied on knowledge of tides and shifting sands. Knights integrated these distant ideas into their own training, practicing counter-strategies for enemies they might never see. This study broadened their tactical imagination, encouraged innovation, and deepened respect for the global diversity of military knowledge. Their fascination with foreign tactics demonstrates that medieval warfare was not insular. It operated within a vast network of shared ideas that transcended borders. Some knights became experts in psychology to understand their enemies. Long before psychology became a formal discipline, knights recognized the importance of understanding intention, motivation, and emotional state. They observed how fear spread through soldiers, how overconfidence weakened defense, and how frustration led to reckless choices. Some knights dedicated themselves to mastering these insights. They watched their opponents carefully, predicting when a commander might hesitate or when troops would break formation. They used tone, posture, and carefully timed silence to sway negotiations or unsettle adversaries. In battle, they recognized the exact moment when morale faltered and exploited it with precision. These psychological skills extended beyond warfare. Knights used them to mediate disputes, prevent betrayal, and form alliances grounded in mutual respect. Their intuitive grasp of human behavior allowed them to navigate the complexities of medieval life with sophistication rarely acknowledged in popular depictions. A few knights developed philosophies that reshaped concepts of honor. Certain knights possessed reflective minds that questioned long-standing assumptions about duty, courage, and moral responsibility. Through travel, hardship, and contemplation, they developed personal philosophies that challenged rigid interpretations of chivalry. Some argued that true honor required restraint rather than aggression. Others emphasized compassion toward enemies as a sign of deeper strength. These ideas influenced students who trained under them and spread through stories told in courts and monasteries. Their reflections sparked debates about justice, leadership, and the purpose of warfare. While many medieval warriors focused solely on practical skill, these philosophical knights expanded the meaning of knighthood into a pursuit of wisdom. Their teachings helped shape more nuanced understandings of responsibility, leaving legacies that continued to influence later generations of thinkers. Some knights created personal codes more demanding than any law. Although bound by chivalric expectations, some knights set standards for themselves far more stringent than any external rule. They adopted vows that restricted the use of violence, except in defense of the vulnerable, or pledged to speak truth, even when deception might bring advantage. Others vowed to refuse rewards for services rendered, believing that purity of intention mattered more than recognition. These personal codes guided their behavior in ways that startled both allies and foes. Their dedication to self-imposed discipline earned admiration, though it also placed them in difficult positions during political tension. Despite hardship, they adhered to their principles with unwavering resolve. Their actions illustrated that honor could be defined not by tradition alone, but by individual conscience. These knights demonstrated that strength lay not merely in mastery of weapons, but in fierce commitment to chosen values. Knightly faith often intertwined with their combat rituals. For many knights, spiritual belief shaped every aspect of martial life. Before battle, they engaged in rituals that focused the mind and prepared the spirit. Some knights carried blessed tokens or whispered brief prayers for clarity and protection. Others performed quiet gestures of reflection that reminded them of their vows. Faith influenced how they interpreted danger, victory, and loss. It provided meaning in moments of fear, allowing them to act with purpose when uncertainty threatened to overwhelm. Many believed that courage emerged from alignment between inner conviction and outward action. Their rituals created a space where intention and belief intertwined, grounding their movements in a sense of deeper calling. This connection between faith and combat reveals that medieval warfare often unfolded within a spiritual framework that shaped not only tactics but identity itself. Some knights believed their armor held spiritual significance. To many knights, armor served a purpose deeper than physical protection. They viewed each piece as a representation of inner strength, crafted not only from metal but from devotion and intention. When preparing for battle, these knights followed rituals that treated armor as a sacred companion. They traced their fingers along engraved symbols that reminded them of ancestral guidance or spiritual vows. Some believed the helmet shielded the mind from despair, while the breastplate guarded the heart from fear. Others saw the interlocking plates as metaphors for virtues that supported one another, forming a complete and disciplined soul. Armourers who forged these suits were respected not merely as craftsmen, but as participants in a spiritual process. The forging fire symbolized transformation, and the quenching water suggested renewal. Knights who carried this belief fought with calm determination, convinced that their armor reflected the best parts of their character. This connection between faith and protection shaped their identity, turning battle preparation into an act of reflection rather than simple readiness. Their armor became a reminder that courage required both physical defense and inner clarity. Other knights considered warfare a path toward moral perfection. Some knights viewed the trials of combat as opportunities to refine the soul. They believed that hardship revealed truth, exposing weaknesses that could be transformed into strength through discipline. These knights approached battle with a sense of profound responsibility, striving not to dominate opponents, but to overcome fear, anger, and pride within themselves. They maintained strict personal rules regarding fairness, restraint, and compassion, even when confronted with cruelty. Victory held meaning only when achieved without compromising conscience. Through repeated struggles, they cultivated patience, humility, and steadiness of purpose. For them, warfare acted as a crucible where the intense pressures of danger shaped deeper moral insight. While many fought for duty or reward, these knights fought to advance their own ethical development, believing that every challenge offered a chance to embody greater virtue. Their philosophy transformed the battlefield into a place of introspection and growth, revealing a dimension of knighthood often overshadowed by tales of outward heroism. Knights sometimes undertook journeys designed to test their soul. Some knights embarked on long, solitary journeys intended not to win honor or achieve military triumph, but to confront questions of purpose, faith, and identity. These journeys led them through remote forests, along ancient pilgrimage routes, or across rugged mountains where silence replaced the noise of courtly life. The challenges they met were inward as much as outward. They reflected on past actions, sought forgiveness, or asked guidance for the future. Every step became an act of contemplation. Along the way, they met travelers whose stories expanded their understanding of hardship and resilience. They also confronted moments of fear and solitude that stripped away pride and demanded honesty. Upon returning home, these knights carried a deeper sense of clarity. Their decisions became gentler, their ambitions steadier, and their leadership more compassionate. These soul-testing journeys revealed that knighthood involved not only public action, but inner exploration of what it meant to live with integrity. Some pilgrimages were so dangerous that completion granted prestige. Certain pilgrimages required knights to cross territories marked by harsh climates, unpredictable politics, or treacherous landscapes. These journeys demanded extraordinary endurance. Travelers navigated deserts where water was scarce, mountain passes threatened by storms, and coastal regions known for sudden attacks from raiders. Knights who survived these routes returned with stories that inspired awe, for the pilgrimage itself became a testament to their resolve. Completion granted prestige because it demonstrated not only devotion to spiritual purpose, but courage in the face of natural and human dangers. Communities welcomed returning pilgrims with reverence, understanding that the hardships they endured had transformed them. Some knights wore subtle symbols indicating they had completed such journeys, allowing others to recognize their accomplishments silently. These dangerous pilgrimages shaped reputation as much as battlefield success, proving that bravery could manifest in pursuit of faith as powerfully as in moments of combat. Knights brought back relics that altered religious belief across regions. During travels to sacred sites, some knights acquired relics that carried profound spiritual meaning. These objects ranged from fragments of ancient structures to small tokens believed to possess protective qualities. When knights returned home with such relics, they influenced local religious practice and strengthened community identity. People gathered to see items connected to distant holy places, viewing them as bridges to events that shaped their faith. Knights who transported relics took great care to protect them from harm, often building special shrines for their display. These relics inspired artwork, liturgical traditions, and new forms of worship. Their presence transformed villages and cities into places of pilgrimage themselves, drawing travelers from across regions. In this way, knights became carriers of spiritual culture, expanding the reach of belief and reinforcing connections between distant communities. Their journeys added layers of meaning to religious experience, deepening the sense of shared devotion within medieval society. Some knights became legendary protectors of sacred sites. Knights known for unwavering faith sometimes dedicated their lives to guarding holy places. These sites attracted pilgrims, scholars, and seekers from many lands, making protection essential against those who might exploit their significance. Knights stationed in such locations balanced vigilance with hospitality. They greeted travelers, offered guidance along safe routes, and defended sanctuaries when threatened by thieves or invading forces. Their presence assured visitors that the site remained a place of refuge. Over time, stories of their dedication grew. Tales described how these knights stood firm during storms, shielded sacred relics from danger, or mediated disputes among pilgrims from rival cultures. Their guardianship became legendary, reinforcing the idea that courage included the defense of spiritual peace. These knights earned admiration not through conquest, but through steadfast commitment to preserving places where people sought healing and inspiration. Knights were sometimes called to defend knowledge rather than territory. Throughout medieval history, certain libraries, monasteries, and scholarly centers relied on knightly protection to preserve precious manuscripts and research. These places held fragile records of science, philosophy, medicine, and history. Political unrest threatened to destroy them. Knights assigned to defend these institutions understood that they were safeguarding more than buildings. They protected accumulated wisdom that shaped the understanding of countless generations. They stood guard as scholars worked through the night, escorted scribes traveling with rare texts, and rescued books from sites threatened by conflict. Their presence affirmed that knowledge was a treasure requiring vigilant defense. These knights demonstrated that warfare involved responsibility to preserve culture as well as repel enemies. By defending learning, they ensured that ideas survived periods of instability and continued to shape the world long after their own lifetimes. Some knights preserved books that might otherwise have been lost forever. During periods of turmoil, knights sometimes found themselves in possession of manuscripts at risk of destruction. Recognizing the value of these works, they carried them across great distances to safety. Some hid them within protected castles, while others entrusted them to monasteries known for their careful preservation. The books they saved included scientific treatises, poetic epics, and legal records essential for future governance. Knights who undertook this responsibility risked danger, for transporting such materials required careful secrecy. Their protection of these texts ensured that vital knowledge endured, influencing literature, education, and philosophy for centuries. These knights rarely received recognition, yet their efforts shaped intellectual history profoundly. They acted as silent guardians of thought, preserving the voices of the past. Knightly libraries contained wisdom collected across continents. Some knights curated personal libraries filled with works gathered through travel, trade, or inheritance. These collections contained manuscripts from diverse cultures, including astronomy from Far Eastern scholars, medical knowledge from Mediterranean physicians, and poetry from distant kingdoms. Knights studied these works to enrich their understanding of the world. Their libraries became centers of conversation where visitors discussed ideas far beyond the boundaries of their own regions. These collections influenced military planning, architecture, artistic style, and philosophical reflection. They also fostered friendships with scholars who sought access to rare texts. The existence of such libraries demonstrates that intellectual pursuits were central to the lives of many knights. Far from being solely warriors, they became custodians of global knowledge, whose collections helped shape future generations of thinkers. Some knights devoted their final years to teaching everything they had learned. After decades of service, travel, and reflection, some knights spent their remaining years passing down wisdom to younger generations. They gathered students from diverse backgrounds, offering instruction not only in combat but in ethics, diplomacy, history, and self-discipline. These elder knights shared stories that conveyed practical lessons, guiding their students through challenges they themselves once faced. Some established small schools within their estates, while others taught informally during long evenings by the fire. Their mentorship shaped future leaders by grounding ambition in humility and purpose. They believed that true legacy lay not in personal victories, but in preparing others to live with courage and integrity. Through their teaching, their experiences endured far beyond their lifetime, becoming part of a continuous chain of knowledge that shaped the evolving meaning of knighthood. As we drift now from the world of medieval knights, let the echoes of their stories settle softly around you. These tales of courage and curiosity, of wandering hearts and watchful minds, remind us that history is never just battles and dates. It is the long, quiet thread of human experience, carried forward by people who learned, struggled, dreamed, and changed the world through choices both great and small. If you enjoyed this peaceful journey into the past, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. For now, let the weight of the day fall away. Let your breath slow. Let your mind settle into a gentle hush as the stories fade into the soft dark of night. Rest deeply. Sleep warmly. Good night.